How do you design an end-to-end ecosystem-based procurement operating model? Well, that's the question we'll be asking over the course of this special 4-part series, Designing an End-to-End Ecosystem Approach to Procurement in partnership with WNS Denali. And in each episode, we'll speak with WNS Denali experts to discuss the basics of an ecosystem approach and then dig into specifics across category management, source to contract, and procure to pay processes. In this third episode, I'm joined by Sushant Adhikari and Sanjeev Singh, both Directors of Capabilities and Solutions at WNS Denali. I'm going to focus in this episode on the source to contract process. And so let's start. And Sanjeev, I'm going to ask you this first question. If you could define what source to contract entails, and how does that tie back to the ecosystem approach we've talked about so far in this series?
Certainly, Phil, and it's very important. Source to contract as a process is most central to procurement and very close to most of the procurement professionals. Downstream from category management and strategy, you would start using the source to contract process, and it runs both for sourcing and contracting. There are some activities which will run in parallel, and there are some activities uh, which are done as part of each individual processes. So
Mhm.
sourcing starts with identifying the supplier, negotiating with suppliers, and formulating a contract. And contracting starts just after that, while there are some overlaps in between, as I talked about. If we look at it from the ecosystem perspective, it is very central part, and this is where the value is getting generated in the ecosystem, and that's where most of the hard savings and other savings, like other soft savings, like sustainability and the responsible procurement practices, are getting covered over here in the entire procurement ecosystem.
Now, the main parts of these podcasts that we really want to get into is when we're thinking about, how do we build this ecosystem to support procurement delivery. Overcoming pain points and finding ways to really, elevate the impact that procurement can have through this model. What are some of the common pain points or failures that you are typically seeing and that you're trying to address as you're solutioning and building operating models around the source to contract process?
So typically, Phil, when we are addressing the common pain points and failures, let me focus upon uh, few things besides the general sourcing challenges which we come across. I would focus on lack of awareness and agility,
Hmm.
tick in the box versus intent to change
Yeah.
approach, and the people's aspect. Phil, if you understand that lack of awareness and agility is mainly driven on how the systems are set up, whether you are able to see the internal data, and how dependent you are on the external data. So whether your ecosystem is ready and adaptable to understand the internal data and consume from the external data, for example, market intelligence and other areas. So, for example, if we see procurement had to contend with sharp declines in demand due to certain restrictive public policies, and there has
Yeah.
been a paradigm shift towards day-to-day working. For example, in the categories like real estate, office space, travel, and say furniture, etc., there was a lot of impact because day-to-day working shifted from office to online meetings, etc. Again, indirect procurement struggles to cope up with these changing regulatory and compliance requirements, and that is something which is very important to be agile. When I mentioned about ticking the box and versus intent to change, it is about the failure to identify your priorities correctly. And of late we are seeing there is a lot of intent to change, as compared to earlier it was, you have to complete this as a compliance point, but now
Hmm.
it is the organization they really want to change. And then people aspects, again, managing strategic sourcing work in house and keeping all the sourcing work in house and even tactical tasks is leading to a lot of bandwidth challenges. And you know what I see trend of companies coming up with third party resources, and they are looking to third parties to uh, help them challenge this resourcing crunch, whether it is talent, hiring, upskilling on, and retaining the challenge. So it is especially where management of relationships and other people dependent tacit knowledges which matters the most at the moment.
So, Sushant, thank you so much for waiting patiently, and thanks, Sanjeev, for answering some of the
Yeah.
questions I had there around, the source to contract process. And I will come back to you with a couple of questions in a few moments. But Sushant, I'm just interested from your perspective. We talked a lot about, the importance of source to contract, what it is, what are some of the pain points as we're building a model around source to contract. What are some of the ways that you see companies overcoming these pain points that we've talked about?
I would rather put it a bit differently here. So rather than looking at these as pain points, now organizations have started looking at these pain points as challenges to help
Mm-hmm.
transform their existing organizations and align them with the larger organizational goals. If you really talk about what needs to be done as an immediate impact to solve all these, is first and foremost have all your digital elements consolidated together. So essentially have everything integrated from perspective of data points that are captured across the source to pay process, centralize it, and then try to derive insights out of that end-to-end process. What it essentially helps solve is the biggest problem around compliance and ways of working. Taking it a bit more to talk about how these individual components can talk to each other and essentially bring all the data points, be it analytics or MI, the external data and actionable insights that can be generated from the same. At the same point, we need to focus on not only understanding how and when we are delivering on particular projects and sourcing execution work, but essentially also to understand where are my people engaged more. Are there any elements where which are eating out their bandwidth? So I need to be very close to the data that is available around utilization of my teams, my talent pool, and how I can better optimize the same. So
Mm-hmm.
a robust mechanism around it is what is required, and then most important piece is around the knowledge, because source to contract as a process or a capability service, it essentially talks about a lot of insights that are captured and are within the particular team's knowledge portfolio, and they get termed as tacit. There needs to be a strong knowledge management mechanism in place as well. And if you bring all these things together in a seamless, integrated fashion, that's what will essentially lay the stone for you to transform from a digital standpoint as well. Another thing that we really want to focus on is ensuring that we have the right investments in talent. And when I talk about it, I usually refer to it as a 3 point mantra. The first one being identifying and hiring the right talent to ensure that there's an environment that attracts the right talent and retains them. Second is ensuring that you create the right roles and map the resources and teams to the right roles, giving them the right kind of view into what responsibilities they are supposed to work on, so that it also helps them gain a visibility into the next level of expertise that they're looking at. And the third most important point is ensuring that there's always a roadmap from a skill development standpoint, which is aligned with your organizational goals as well as personal goals for a particular individual. So all these put together and bundled up as overall investments in talent should really help cater to one of the critical challenges that organizations are facing today.
Yeah, Sushant, if I want to add upon to that, it is also how procurement organization works with an executive leadership team to achieve that alignment, right? So,
Mhm.
change management in these solutions and has become an important part, and there is a need to identify white spaces in terms of policies, process, and technology, and each of these organizations have to look at overall performance and value delivery against their organizational goals and objectives. They need to get in the buy-in to drive transformational changes top down, or to enable procurement team to deliver higher values to the stakeholders. Typically, what we have seen is become difficult to get a mandate top down, and and it's very important that people spend time to do that with their executive leadership.
Sushan, I want to kind of follow up on that when we talked about some of the challenges, as you quite rightly repositioned that rather than pain points. When you're looking at designing a fit for purpose operating model for a source to contract, what are some of the nuances that you're looking out for?
Oh, very good question, Phil. So, let me start with what are common challenges, and I think Sanjeev touched on these precisely, bringing up savings, compliance, market agility, and focus, all driven together as part of your overall organization growth goals. So, apart from this, what we really have to look at and kind of explore into is understanding how organizations, S2C organization team is structured, whether it's centralized
Mm-hmm.
and aligned by categories. Are there regionally aligned teams without any oversight and acting independently in silos? Or, say, to your point, right, bringing in external advisors or experts to run key strategic global projects. So that needs to be understood very clearly as to what it is today and how it has to be tomorrow to improve on it. Couple of other points are precisely one on talent, and I think we touched upon it briefly in the last response. Is also about not only ensuring that you have the right kind of talent, so assessing or what talent pool do you have today in your teams, and whether that needs any upskilling or a realignment. And secondly, are they bogged down by too much work, and there's a huge bandwidth crunch that needs to be solved for as an immediate basis. So if you really have to bring all these together and put it in an ecosystem perspective, you essentially need to assess the current ecosystem of that S2C organization from various angles, be it your organization structure, be it your team structure and alignment, be it your enabling technologies and digital enablers, or be it your external influences in terms of your market intelligence, your external advisors, or any data and information from that sort.
And so, as you start, implementing and designing these, um, taking into account some of these nuances when you're designing the operating models around source to contract, I wonder if there's any examples you can share with us of, some of the things that you have done that have really made an impact for the organizations that you've supported.
Oh, absolutely, Phil. And I would have liked to talk about it more, but let me quote one of them. So this is one of our clients who is globally very aggressive in its growth strategy. And when we started this engagement, the key issue at that point or challenge at that point was to augment their current bandwidth challenges.
Mm-hmm.
And where we engage with them is try to infuse more of our strategic sourcing resources to help their category managers take out that bandwidth challenge, let them focus more on strategic work, decision making, and towards the growth story. And eventually, as next step, we started to focus on driving more savings generation out of the projects that our team was running. And then, as an overall growth story from delivering value out of this program, we then eventually set ourselves to help them restructure and realign their organization to carve out all the tactical activities, form a center of excellence who essentially focuses on taking care of all the tactical and execution stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the core team there, which is category aligned, now focuses on ensuring that they're aligned very closely with the businesses and are very aligned and work hand in hand with the business teams to towards their growth objectives.
And so separating that strategic from the tactical is something that you really recommend when you're looking at developing operating models, so that the strategic, I want to pause on the language that I use because it's important. I think that you can be your tactical spend can still be strategic, but it's the way that you approach that spend. And so you advocate on pulling that apart because you're really approaching spend that is of higher value to the organization in a different way than that is of a lower value, and not having the same people really mixed doing both, which often leads them to manage all spend tactically because they're really against time crunches and there's kind of capability questions around that as well.
Absolutely, Phil. And just to add to it, what essentially enables that is creating an underlying architecture where your data, your information, your decisions flow seamlessly across teams.
Well, Sanjeev, I want to just come to you one last question before we wrap up today's episode, and
Sure.
that's if there's anything that we've not really talked about today where you feel would help position any listener who's looking and who's thinking about, rebuilding their procurement, the end-to-end ecosystem of
Sure.
procurement. What should they be thinking about to ensure that they're setting their team up for successful and sustained growth?
One of our CPOs had recently, in a conversation, mentioned that I want my procurement department to look cool, sleek, and responsible. So, invest in creating procurement experts who are empowered by next generation procurement ecosystem and have the confidence of business stakeholders and suppliers in turn.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, use of technology platforms and products is absolutely mandatory, but they should look for enhanced and seamless source to contract experience and plug in all the white uh, spaces which they have in between. Third, be the torch bearer to drive ESG practices within the organization and industry, and be the person who is leading procurement towards responsible procurement and sustainability initiatives.
Thanks for listening in to today's episode, part of our 4-podcast series called Designing an End-to-End Ecosystem Approach to Procurement in partnership with WNS Denali. To listen back to the entire series, go to artofprocurement.com/ecosystem series. That's all one word. That's artofprocurement.com/ecosystem